Welcome in the arena. My name's Allyson Klein. This is a Data Insights episode, so that means Jeniece Wnorowski is with me. Hey, Jeniece, how you doing?
Hi, Allyson. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's the first day of spring. Very exciting for those of us living in the Pacific Northwest because it means that at some point the rain will end. This is an exciting episode, and I just wanted to ask you who you brought with you and what the topic is for today.
Yeah. So today I brought a friend of mine. We go way back. I brought Nilesh Shah, who does a lot of great things. You probably see him all over if you're not on LinkedIn. But Nilesh is the VP of Business Development at ZeroPoint. So we're going to talk a little bit about, what he's up to at ZeroPoint, what he's really, working on in terms of engineering systems, and just get his take on AI and how do we scale this stuff. So Nilesh, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Allyson and Jeniece. This is so much fun, always fun to chat with you all.
Now, Nilesh, I see you all the time at conferences, and you're always in the heart of where the industry is focusing its most acute innovation, and you're always on to the next thing. A couple of weeks ago, I saw you enmeshed in quantum, and I know that that's a passion that you're going to talk about. I know that you work in the memory and storage space as well. But why don't we just start with ZeroPoint, and can you introduce what you're doing at ZeroPoint and how it relates to that broader purview?
ZeroPoint Technologies is a company based out of Sweden. It's a startup, and it's about all about compression. The company was founded on the premise that data and memory are going to explode, or the need for data and memory will explode, and one of the ways to tackle that challenge is through lossless memory compression. So what I do at ZeroPoint is I drive business development at ZeroPoint Technologies, and then bringing and matching up the technology to pretty much across the spectrum of hyperscaler chip companies. And ZeroPoint Technologies is an IP licensing company. So we develop IP that can be integrated into any piece of silicon. So it could be an ASIC chip, I think Inference chip, or it could be a GPU, or it could be a memory controller, which could be, for example, a CXL controller. But right now, our key focus is, of course, AI inference systems, where the need for memory and the pain is real, and people are feeling it.
So Nilesh, at a high level, given that information you just gave us, at a high level, why is this data movement becoming so critical for you? Specifically with modern computing systems. What's the big deal in your opinion?
The big deal out here is if you look at what it takes to move data all the way from storage out to, let's say, high bandwidth memory or LPDDR memory, and then into the silicon itself, into the heart of the silicon, so like an SRAM memory. And if you compare that movement of data to the actual computation that you perform on that little bit of data, it's ridiculous. It's almost 10x more expensive in terms of power to move that bit of data than it is to actually run a computation on it. So from that perspective alone, that's why if you look at all the inference chip innovators out there, look at Cerebras, look at Grok, look at SambaNova, Rebellions, I can rattle off tens of different names. But if you look at the core innovation of all of these companies, it's not really about the compute as much as it is about data movement and memory hierarchy. So for example, Grok is all about SRAM. We've seen with Cerebras, it's all about wafer scale SRAM. If you look at other companies like SambaNova, they're tiering the memory. So really what that screams out at me is the pain point is clear. If you want to scale inference, it's all about the memory hierarchy. And that's where ZeroPoint comes in by compressing that memory and enabling greater bandwidth and also capacity, which is what you need if you're going to crank out more tokens per second per watt. And you have to do it efficiently because, like I said, the data movement is the expensive piece compared to the actual compute.
Nilesh, when you think about the fact that data is distributed across data centers, both in the cloud and on-prem at the edge, and you talk about that data movement, do you think that we're constructing AI workflows correctly for that management of data? And how do you see that changing as enterprises start scaling inference into different areas of their business?
Yeah, I think one key thing about if we look at the problem we're trying to solve, it's really agentic AI is entering the workflow. So, Allyson, we were at the Synopsys conference just last week, and one thing that became obvious as Synopsys, and then before that, I was at DVCon. So, when you think about EDA tools that people require a lot of memory and a lot of data to crank out new chips, what we are finding now, or at least what I heard from these conferences, is now these chip designers want to integrate 5, 6, maybe even 10 different LLMs, all focused on a very specific task. For example, chip verification or error detection, or think of all kinds of things, RTL verification flows. So it's becoming obvious that now you have these domain specific inference solutions that are required for performing, let's say, even EDA operations and the same thing. So at that point, what happens is the way enterprises will need to think about data, you're going to need the data that you need to design the chip, but then you're going to need this extra intelligence layer as well in order to enable agentic AI to make that process even more efficient.
So as data continues to become a challenge, right, and certainly, as you said, the compute is important, but the data is becoming more important. As you see new computing paradigms emerge, right, where do you see memory bandwidth becoming a bottleneck, or do you see that inherently becoming a bigger problem in the future, and will there be a new change to address it?
Yeah, I think with these agentic workflows, if you break down inference, really take any transformer model, and there are two sections to it. There's a prefill stage and there's a decode stage. So the prefill is pretty compute intensive, but the decode phase is extremely memory intensive. So if you break it down further, it's really what's limiting your tokens per second. If you need instant answers, right, responsiveness at scale across the enterprise. I'm not talking about one user interacting with one chat agent, but I'm talking about an entire company of say 100,000 people interacting at that scale and then across the multiple streams of data that you might have in an enterprise. It's really that decode phase which has become the bottleneck. And at GTC, that was pretty evident. If you look at what the keynotes were talking about, is really breaking down that decode into heterogeneous architecture. So it's not all about GPUs anymore. You need these highly specialized ASICs that can do the decode phase extremely efficiently. And that's where, with compression, you can actually get more efficiency if you can compress that data by say 1.5x or 2x. Now you're moving lesser data, and at the same time, what that does is it increases your bandwidth and the effective capacity that your your decode engine actually sees on the silicon. I think those are some of the trends shaping the industry. It's going to be heterogeneous compute. It's going to be pipelines. Inference is no longer just like a single kind of an operation. It's going to be a pipeline going through heterogeneous processes, and all of that needs to be done efficiently.
Now, you talk about heterogeneity, and obviously that's been something that the industry is looking at with all of these different accelerator technologies and how we deliver brunt force compute to some very challenging workloads. I guess the other question that I have for you, because I do know that you are diving into the quantum space, is when does conventional computing platforms run out of gas and we need to move to alternative architectures like quantum computing? Where do you see that line is there a line? I guess, where is it? And what types of workloads and challenges is quantum uniquely suited to address?
Yeah, I think maybe let's talk about where does quantum enter into the picture. So really the big question is, first of all, is quantum computing required, right? What is the chat GPT moment for quantum computing? That's the favorite question I like to ask. And by the way, that's going to be the subject of a panel at the Accelerated Compute Show next week. And so I'm moderating a panel on quantum computing in the data center uh, infrastructure. So that's exactly what we're going to be discussing is where does quantum computing intersect AI data centers? Because the AI data center is currently in the trillions of dollars, the market. If you look at quantum, it can be measured maybe in the billions of dollars. So obviously the immediate point at which an attach point would make sense would be to attach quantum processing units into these AI data centers to efficiently offload some of the work. So it may not replace the entire, let's say, inferencing, but there might be some efficient search space algorithms, for example, that could be offloaded to quantum processors. So these are exactly the unanswered questions we hope to get more insight in at the Accelerated Compute Show. We're going to have a bunch of quantum computing leaders on the panel.
So yeah, it is awesome. I agree. That's and, you're going to this show next week. Everyone's kind of talking about it, and I think you're right, Nilesh. We're in the early throes of it, right? What is quantum computing? What does it mean? When do you really, when does this shift have to take place? Is it next year? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? I'm just curious from your perspective and all the different companies you've been kind of working with and learning from and consulting with, where do you think what industries will quantum computing really impact? What do you think?
So going back all the way to Intel, Jeniece, when we worked together, and if you remember, we worked on a project, Optane Memory Technology, and at that time, this was back like several years ago. At that time, quantum computers were still at the toy level. They were like 5, 6 qubit. A qubit is the measure of quantum computing as you have bits. And at that time, the big focus was on simulating quantum computers. So, for example, a 50 qubit simulation required 2 to the power 50 memory capacity. So that's where we worked on Optane. And the very first use case actually was with Alan Asprub, who's a leading quantum chemist at that time at Harvard, but now he's got a huge 3-digit million funding at the University of Toronto to investigate quantum chemistry. So now fast forward now, even now the use cases that I hear about are quantum chemistry. That seems to be like a natural fit in drug discovery for the types of processes that quantum computing is designed for. Is actually, and because a lot of these mechanics in the quantum chemistry space are quantum in nature, so they seem like a good fit. Now, beyond that, of course, there are other applications which are non-data centers. So think space, think those kind of applications where you can use quantum devices. But of course, I'm biased towards the data center, so I keep coming back to, okay, what are those use cases where quantum can help in the data center? But I strongly believe the unlock of potential for quantum computing is primarily in the data center. And of course, there are really interesting use cases for space and, for example, sovereign type of capabilities where quantum effects can help, develop like secure type of devices that go into space. But I'm looking primarily at the data center and the application. So right now, I would say quantum chemistry. There's maybe some finance applications that I saw. At least some of the banks are deploying early quantum computers uh, primarily to test out what a flow would look like if you were to have serious quantum computing capabilities. And then maybe a third use case might be for encryption and making even more secure encryption protocols, because we know people are actually hoarding data on the internet today in the expectation that in 5 years they'll have a quantum computer. So your data might be encrypted today, but in 5 years, if they gather all this data, they can decrypt it 5 years later. So yeah, how I think though that becomes an interesting use case for quantum to actually come up with stronger encryption algorithms.
So, large companies, be it the banks and maybe some others, are dabbling in it. But what really kicks it into high gear, in your opinion, and has it go a little more broad across the globe? And when is that timing, in your opinion?
Yeah, and actually, that is the title of the panel. Is it quantum computing? Is it 2 years away or 20? So I would say the uh, tune in next week to find out more. So I don't want to take away from all the expert quantum panelists. Of course, I'll be speaking with all the experts, so I rely on their opinion much more. So I think, in fact, next week I'll actually have a much better picture after having put some of these quantum experts on the spot on the panel and getting some deep insights from their experiences deploying and working with real customers in this space.
Now, Nilesh, you said something really interesting earlier about just it's about the data, and I want to go back to conventional for a second. I know that you're working on the lunatic fringe of what can be done with memory and storage. When you think about the fact that we've got leading edge SSD technology, like what Solidigm is delivering to the market. We have standard DRAM, we have HBM, we have SRAM that you talked about. Do you see anything on the horizon that will break through some of the bottlenecks that we're seeing and introduce a new way to manage memory and storage? And where in the industry are these things being discussed?
I think a couple of things. We're seeing a lot of innovation, or at least funding going into new innovation, just simply because memory and actually even storage are sold out. So looking for denser solutions for storage and then denser solutions for memory. So I think that's where a lot of investments are going. Alternative technologies to DRAM. So DRAM has been pretty much, DRAM was invented several decades ago. It's not fundamentally changed that much. And so people are looking at new technologies, think MRAM or other persistent type of memories that may be denser and may have better power characteristics, and also may not be limited by some of the manufacturing limitations that are actually now showing up because of the heavy demands from AI. So I think there's maybe like three different vectors. One is looking at alternative memory technologies. The other vector is looking at alternative interfaces. So how you get those memories to communicate to the compute engines. And then I would say entirely new uh, paradigms in terms of networking, not just because now the conversation is not about a single chip or even a server or even a rack. I would argue now it's really about data center scale. So what I'm seeing companies do is now I don't care what you put in your memory chip or your storage chip, because the whole thing moves as one unit, like one data center. Or I would say, what is the new unit or the metric for compute? It's going to be megawatts. So I give you 1 megawatt, you put whatever you want in it, storage, memory, compute, and then you crank out these AI tokens. So I think that's how a lot of memory and storage innovation will be driven. And a lot of the things we know today, like form factors, let's say an SSD form factor on a PCI card, or say DRAM memory going over LPDDR or HBM, there might be some completely dramatic new technologies where you'll be thinking at data center scale rather than chip or server or even rack scale. I think those are the three vectors I see a lot of innovation, or at least startups looking into these spaces to come out with a breakthrough.
And kind of as these technologies have, evolve over time, what do you think are people's biggest misconception about it, and how what will it take to make next generation compute systems actually usable in practice? Bringing it back.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. One is, like I said, in terms of you mentioned misconceptions. I think one misconception is that in order to produce more tokens, you need more power. So it's like we don't have an infinite supply of power. So that's one misconception, that, oh, well, AI is going to grow, so let's just keep putting gigawatts of power. So I think that will be one of the, I expect a surprising breakthrough is someone will come up with an entirely new style of physics, which will break that linear kind of assumption that people have. Is like, okay, I need, from going from 100 LLMs to a million, or going from a million users to 100 million. Well, just multiply the megawatts of power. I think that may not be valid in the future. Something will have to fundamentally change in the physics in order to break that assumption.
Nilesh, final question for you. When you look at Accelerated next week, and you look at the companies that are gathered there, from foundational component players to infrastructure providers to neoclouds and service providers and others that are prognosticating on what's happening next in AI, what do you expect to emerge in that conference, and how do you articulate your own vision for where AI will go by the end of 2026?
So yeah, this is going to be a fun conference. Like you said, neoclouds, hyperscalers, neochip companies, even quantum computing companies, they'll all be at the same place and having the same conversation. So I think a key thing that I hope will emerge from here is clarity, actually. And by the way, there will be enterprise end users at this conference, and the storage innovators like Solidigm and others will be there. So I'm expecting that people will walk away with a better vision of what it takes, what are the components and ingredients that go into making an AI system, and how is that different from just building your traditional data centers. Where we've been doing data centers for years. So what's different now? I don't think everyone clearly appreciates that. Besides, like, yeah, you might have heard of GPUs, but there's a lot more, like we discussed. There's memory, there's storage, and these things need to work in synchrony. Otherwise, you're not going to have an optimal system. And then even the compute itself is getting disaggregated. It's getting heterogeneous in nature. So I think people will walk away with that understanding, and the fact that not all tokens are created equal. So one token for a text prompt is not the same as a token for, let's say, a video generation. So what does it take to support each of these different types of tokens and different use cases? And not all models are created equal. Now we're seeing for enterprise, you may not need these gigantic, hundreds of billions of parameter models, but you might need tens of really small models that are highly efficient for laser focused tasks that you need for an enterprise. So I think all of these conversations will emerge at the conference next week.
I'm excited about the conference. A lot of people may not be going that are listening though, Nilesh, so hopefully those sessions will be recorded. But where can folks learn more about you and maybe reach out to you and get more information just in general?
I think one great place to start is, of course, you can reach out on ZeroPoint Technologies on my email, and then also via LinkedIn. And then, of course, if you're at these conferences, of course, I love chatting with people and learning from them. So, yeah, that's always an option. But yeah, Yeah, I hope people reach out and exchange ideas.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, Nilesh, to have you on the show. I'm going to be at Accelerated as well. The Tech Arena team will be there. I know, Jeniece, you're going to be there as well. Should be a fantastic conference in New York next week. But with that, I just want to say this is another episode of Data Insights, and it was a pleasure to have both of you with me on this journey.
Thank you, Allyson. Thank you, Nilesh.
Thanks so much. This was fun.